Hello, everybody, and this is now the second installment in a conversation that Rod Botsis and I are having about the return of the Prodigal Son. We, of course, looking at that book of Henri Nouwen and the painting of Rembrandt, and of course the parable in Luke 15. All of those agendas converging in this conversation. And you'll remember last time when we first started this conversation, Rod and I, we were talking about our mutual love of Henri, and Rod was telling the story of having met Henri in 1995 in Chicago, and we were talking about why we love his type of writing, his tone, the content of his writing. So yeah, now we're back together again, and we want to take our conversation a little further. You all right, Rod?
Excellent. Thrilled to be here. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Yeah.
Great. Well, I've prepared the painting again just to remind people. This is the painting that we're dealing with. Sasha has put on a nicer, clearer copy. In fact, this is the clearest copy I've ever had. Because up in the top,
absolutely, that's wonderfully clear.
In the top left-hand corner, you can see the lady standing there.
Yes.
Who you can often not see so clearly on the printed version.
No.
So this is the painting we're talking about. And last time, if those who are tuning in and listening to these video clips remember, we were specifically talking about the two groups of characters in this painting. There was the observers around the outside and the participants in the middle. And we were saying to ourselves, why? I mean, look, there is some comfort in being an observer and having anonymity, but where the action is really in the center of that painting, which is not quite the physical center, but slightly off to the left.
George, I must say, now that I have to walk with a walking stick every day, I'm drawn to the character on the right, but I'm envious of that red cloak.
It's almost regal, isn't it?
But he can keep the beard. Oh, my Lord. Sorry about that, but anyway.
I'll have that part. But, the other thing that's apparently so striking, Rod, is, and I've never seen this in real life, obviously. I mean, it's on my bucket list, St. Petersburg, but not sure when I'll ever get there. But Rembrandt had a way of working with light. Yeah. And I think we'll talk further about it in a later conversation, but the father's face radiating down to his hands. And even in the face of the one they think is the older son, there's this beautiful light in this painting, isn't there?
Yeah. I'm always amazed at how artists can start with nothing and then produce light.
Yes.
And obviously he's a master at it. We've got a couple of artists in the congregation who you know, and they in fact gave me my first poster of this painting, Alan and Anne Robenheimer, and they both have an ability to take an empty canvas and produce light that is breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. Yeah.
Fantastic. Good. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll take the painting off there. Now,
good.
We're talking today about the character that so enchanted the early biblical, the scribes and so on, and even the translators of the scripture, that they named the whole parable after him. And that is the prodigal son, or the lost son. And we know that in Luke 15, Jesus is telling stories. These are not necessarily historical accounts. He's not, although they might be, but Jesus is telling a story, as he so often did, to teach people about the kingdom of God. And this is really the grand finale of a trilogy of lost things. Yeah. And the wonder of this trilogy of stories, and I'm sure you've preached on it hundreds of times, and I probably preached on it half of the times you preached on it.
A couple of times, but anyway.
That's right, because my ministry is roughly half of yours. Anyway, so
only in some ways.
So the wonder of this trilogy of stories is everything gets found. They may be lost, but at the coin, the sheep, the son, they all get found, and maybe even some more characters besides them, like possibly the older son. This younger son, really a scandalous personality, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, the the portrait of himself as a young man with Saskia in the bar, as you refer to it, which probably is true. I have always, from the moment I saw that, I just thought, it's just ugly. I don't know why. I find nothing about it appealing. He looks drunk. He looks like he's sneering. She looks like a hard, suffering wife who's got to put up with this. And if there's jolliment in it, I'm afraid I don't see it. Even the old peacock in the corner there looks like he's got a beady eye. That's a bit odd. I just think it's compared to the Prodigal painting. This is just terrible.
It may be a representation of my life. I'm not quite sure. I mean, my wife's name is Sasha. Not quite
I was close on that, yeah.
But yes, you're right. It's a harsh painting. It's not a gentle painting like the other one.
Yeah, I was reflecting with one of the elders today about how one's hard heart gets you into trouble. And when I've reflected on my hard heart, how much damage it's done, and I'm not fishing for compliments at all, but just a simple fact, hard hearts create trouble. And I think back to my younger days, well, I don't think they're as bad as this, but there were some thoughts and images and desires that were completely ungodly. And if they had been put on a canvas, oh heavens, I wouldn't like that. By the way, your predecessor at St. Mungo's, Kingsley Dale, preached a magnificent four sermons on the Prodigal Son a couple of years before he died. And he happened to be the one who first taught me to drink beer in public, but I don't think even he would have enjoyed this picture. It speaks of just, I just want to move away from it.
But Henri Nouwen in his book uses this painting to tell us that this is Rembrandt's story. And
absolutely. And our story, George.
Yeah, he points out that this is Rembrandt's younger face. So Rembrandt has painted this picture of the younger son with his own face in it and the face of his common-law wife, Saskia, who he also treated very badly. And when he was tired of her, apparently he had her committed to an asylum. And then when there was a chance of her coming out of the asylum, he conspired to have her kept there. And I mean, listen, I want to read this little section from page 26 of The Prodigal Son. This is what, how Nouwen writes about it. He said, Rembrandt had all the characteristics of the prodigal son. Brash, self-confident, spendthrift, sensual, and very arrogant. At the age of 30, he painted himself with his wife Saskia as the lost son in a brothel. No interiority is visible here. Drunk, with his half-open mouth and sexually greedy eyes, he glares scornfully at those who look at his portrait as if to say, isn't this a lot of fun? With his right hand, he lifts up an empty glass, a half-empty glass, while with his left, he touches the lower back of his girl, whose eyes are no less lustful than his own. Rembrandt's long curly hair, his velvet cap with huge white feather, and the leather-sheathed sword with a golden hilt touching the backs of the two merrymakers leave little doubt about their intentions. The drawn curtain in the upper right corner makes one think of the brothels in Amsterdam's infamous red light district. Gazing intently at his sensuous self-portrait of the young Rembrandt as the prodigal son, I can scarcely believe that this is the same man who 30 years later painted himself with eyes that penetrate so deeply into the hidden mysteries of life. Isn't that amazing?
I'll bow to Henry's superiority in seeing some things that I either don't see or disagree with, like this poor lady's eyes and one or two other things. But I think it clearly represents Rembrandt himself, but it's a picture of my pre-converted life. No interiority, completely superficial, making light of stuff that should not be made light of, and desires that I do not want to go into now.
Right, but I'll put it back off there. But I think sometimes we forget, and I know it was a little book that I read, I think also whipped off your bookshelf, about the Gospel of Luke and the way in which the parables relate to the culture of the Jewish world. What was it called?
Poet and Prophet by
That's the one.
Bailey.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now and quotes it quite at length, which I'm very pleased to see. Yeah.
Okay. Well, now that book, if I remember correctly, really taught me about the sociocultural circumstances. You know, one of the things that was pointed out was that there was no bank accounts. There were no stocks and bonds, no RAs and life policies. So when he demanded his share of the estate, what was required was that portion of the family property would have had to be sold off, and the livestock. So the scar of that would have maintained even after he returned. And no wonder it was such an affront to the older brother that this person was so warmly received back, when in fact what he had done is he had injured the family for the medium to long term in his demand.
Yeah. It's just it's just so greedy and just so ugly. But again, the love of the father. Can I just compare something in the picture with Saskia, the painting with Saskia, and the final one?
Yes.
Nouwen makes the point in the Prodigal that he's got this dagger or sword, and you can see it in the first painting here with Saskia, and you see it again later. And Nouwen seems to say that when he returns, it's the one last thing that says he belongs to this family, that he has a sword.
Yes.
I interpreted that completely differently when I first saw this, and I'm not sure I agree with Nouwen. I'm happy for his interpretation as an interpretation. But again, I thought if he was reduced to the circumstances he was and had to survive on his wits and maybe his fists and not just his wits, this would have been the last representation of a life given over to self-defense, self-reliance, and a violent self in order to survive.
Yes.
And it's carried, if it was a sign of superiority or ownership from the family, it would never have been that in the pigsties. And I think he brings it back into the family, and for me, it's a damning sort of thing. And again, just how in our lostness we rely on self, and in our lostness we become violent in speech and thought and attitudes and considerations for others. We become utterly violent. And
that's interesting. Yeah, interesting take on it. I had never thought a little deeper into that sword, which I now see is also in the second painting. I'd seen it in the original, but self-reliance and how
I think I've told you the story before of one of our Sunday school teachers, a mother, brought a gun a revolver in her handbag into the creche area she was looking after one Sunday, and the bag spilled open and the gun was revealed, and obviously a parent complained about it. That's how I got to know, and I was shocked that this had happened. And she was absolutely adamant it was her right to bring the weapon she thought would protect her wherever she went. And I thought, so anyway, those are my kind of pastoral links to this dagger here.
And that sort of explanation of the sword would also, or the dagger in the case, because this original painting of Rembrandt seems to be more of a dagger, would also connect with the explanation that's given, the speech that is rehearsed. That upon return, I'm no longer worthy to be your son, but I'm happy to be a servant. And so this is my idea of how we can save the situation. You can save face by not taking me back into the household as the pater familias, the father of the family, and I will go and stay in the servant quarter because it's a darn sight better than what I've experienced in recent times. You know, let's fix it. And don't we all go back to God somehow in that way? We've got a few explanations, and we've thought it through, and we can tell him exactly how this can be a happy family, but without him having to do what he doesn't want to do, and us not having to do what we don't want to do.
I'm talking on this coming Sunday on justification and how we justify ourselves in all sorts of ways, accommodate ourselves to God, try to ingratiate ourselves with God. And this phrase that comes up later in the book, which I think is one of your favorites, that we do not have to explain anything to the Father. That his love is just so encompassing, we don't have to explain.
Besides, he knows already.
Yeah, just it's such a freeing thought that he just knows. Yeah,
it's great. Okay, so let's just look just for a minute. Don't want to take too long over it, but look at the painting in front of us here. What do we see?
Yeah.
This is a bedraggled creature here. If you compare him with everybody else in the picture, whether they are family or servants or whatever, he's the worst off of the lot of them, isn't he?
Yeah, by a long way.
Because it's underwear. It's the linen garment underwear, the similar thing to what Jesus would have worn that night when he washed feet. And there's a shoe that's broken, and the other one's even fallen off the foot. The head is shaved, and Henri Nouwen says the only two people who get the head shaved is when you go into the army or you're going to jail. Because they've got to keep you clean and free of nits and lice and things like that.
Yeah.
So this is either a prisoner or a mercenary come home, and he is just totally to pieces. If you look at, there's no red garment there. No. There's no gold lace. All of the finery of the others is absent from this young man. So he really has, he's reached the bottom. He's reached the absolute pit. And
the garments are dirty. His feet are dirty. His head may be shaved, but it's got no light gleaming from it. It's a pathetic thing, Even one shoe off. I don't know how often you've seen just one shoe lying next to a road. How come never two shoes? And the one shoe looks so lonely and so depressing because it speaks of depravity. And even here he's got it that one, one's on, one's off. And terrible. I guess
Jesus, when he tells the story itself in Luke 15, the way in which he impresses upon his Jewish audience the level to which this young man has sunk is he says he ended up feeding the pigs, know. And this is just no place for a good Jew boy to be.
Not for anyone, boy. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Good. So let me take the picture off and then ask you about. I think another thing that Bailey really taught me is what a scandal this must have been, for the family. When the people sat there listening to Jesus tell the story, they must really have got the thrills. Because the thing just gets worse and worse. It's like one of those shows that you watch on the TV and you think it's a disaster, but then it takes another step down. The disaster gets worse and worse until such time you actually feel embarrassed.
You're still watching the Jerry Springer show.
No, I can't admit to that. It's just, I suppose you're right, because just when you think there's a child out of wedlock, you recognize now they're cousins as well. It's awful.
But George, partly, I'm sure you must have had, well, let me just say I've had a couple of families over the years where one of the children have become drug addicts, and seriously so. And in the inability of the family to resolve this, in their love, they have impoverished themselves completely. And the child has simply taken and taken and taken and taken. And the scandal is not just that he takes, but the scandal begins to involve the parents. Like, how stupid are they to keep giving?
Yeah.
And even to the point of borrowing from a wider family sometimes to say, look, he's really got himself into trouble and needs an operation and we don't have the money. And you realize this depravity is just so terrible because it's self-created by this greedy little boy.
Yes.
And in fact is saying, I wish you were dead and I wish everything was mine.
Yes.
That's just
Because
hard.
and even more so for that sort of society, because you and I are able to write a will, which can differentiate between children and relatives, and leave a small sentimental thing to somebody and whatever. But in the culture of the Jewish fathers, and of the Roman fathers, there was no such conversation. You didn't have a conversation about death. The father owned everything. There was nothing owned by any son, older, younger, whatever. And when the father died, the custom was that it passed only to the older son. So the younger son had no inheritance, and yet this one demands his share, and really, in truth, he has no share. So he breaks the family unit. He demands things which he can't have, and the ultimate outcome of this is going to be disaster in the mind of the hearers, and he should get his just deserts. He should be punished according to his sense of arrogance and his want of things not his, that not destined for him, his envy. I mean, these are all, envy is one of the 10 Commandments. I mean, they would have said, listen, this is just ridiculous. And so, but into this context, Henri Nouwen tells a story which comes from Jesus in Luke 15, and a painting in the 16th century, which is countercultural. The father behaves so differently. I mean, how do you reconcile? Where does this father get this stuff from? It's not from his culture.
Well, it's really interesting that even if Jesus was a Jew, the culture of the kingdom is not the same as the culture of Judaism. And the Pharisees had obviously kept missing that they may have known the scriptures, but they did not know the heart of the one who wrote the scriptures. So Jesus has got to tell this brilliant story that reveals not culture, but a completely different culture that can only be of the kingdom.
A God who responds in kindness to an affront, to a turning away from.
George, I made a few little notes here of this child demanding his freedom, and what is the actual cost of asking for freedom in all sorts of situations. And if you're in some sort of system, family system, church system, business, whatever, and you demand freedom, and someone's got the power to give it to you, what does it actually cost to give you that? So when Paul writes that Christ has given us freedom for freedom's sake, it suddenly is such a tremendous thing to hold, such a precious thing to hold. It's not just gay abandon, it's an enormous privilege to be given freedom, because he bore the cost.
Yes.
And sets us free so that we actually never have to explain, but we have this enormous privilege of being free. And wow, what responsibility comes with that freedom then. And my mind has just been running around that as to when have I demanded to be free, but in fact I was costing somebody else something.
Yes. And then I guess on top of that, Rod, is not only the sense of freedom that we've been given, and we see that in Genesis 3, but the amazing, the additional step, the additional level of grace is that even when we choose to abuse our freedom, like the prodigal did, he is still willing to accept us, because Absolutely. He sees his mark on us. We are made in his image and likeness, and that is almost impossible to understand for those like the Pharisees and like some of us who really trade on fairness and justice and so on rather than grace.
Yeah, we'll get to the Father in a couple of weeks' time, I suppose. But the enormity of the Father's love in being able to know it's going to cost me perhaps everything, but I'm going to give the Son his freedom. And everything could be reputation and as well as the physical cost. I just think in my sinfulness, what have I made others pay in order for, even now, not just pre-conversion, but now in my sinful behavior, what am I making others pay who tolerate and graciously give me freedom, and how much, the sense I'm in debt to the graciousness of God in other people.
Yes.
I'm prodigal.
Yes. The next interesting thing that I found here in this, we're reading Henri Nouwen and reflecting on the painting, is a concept that Henri Nouwen uses in a different place. And in fact, he uses it not once, but often. And that is this notion of the house of love versus the houses of fear. Now, specifically in Reaching Out, where he describes his 3 steps to become closer with God, to have a close relationship. Yes. In spirituality, we might call it the desire for unity with God. He says we need to do 3 things. We need to, firstly, we need to move from loneliness to solitude. Yes. Which is how we find ourselves. We're fractured, but if we find our oneness and who we are, and we're happy with who we are, then we move to the relationship with others. He says we must move from hostility, which is our natural state of being with each other, suspicious, concerned what the motives of the other will be, concerned with whatever the other does, whether there's a hidden agenda, blah, blah, blah. And we need to move to hospitality. That's an easy communion. Yes. And then, of course, with God, from illusion, speaking into the ether, to prayer, which is a dialogical relationship. Now, Henri says that when we reach that point, then we move from the houses, in plural, of fear, which is our natural situation, where we're individuals and cut off from others, even from our very selves, and cut off from God, and we move to the house, singular.
It's very good. I'm so pleased you picked that up, because while he's got those 3 movements, I've, in my own notes, in the actual book, I've written that 4th one, to move from fear to being at home in the house of love. And of course, house is like kingdom. There is one of these things that's going to provide for you all you need. There will be freedom there, but there will be pleasure there that's not going to cost other people. It is the house of love. And the houses of fear must be plural, because they never satisfy.
Yes.
So when Jesus says in Matthew 5 that when we hunger and thirst after righteousness, we will be filled or satisfied, there are very few scriptures that talk of that satisfaction.
Yes.
And satisfaction lies with God in the house of love. Everything else is a constant rediscovery. It doesn't fulfill. It doesn't satisfy. Yes. The nature of lust, the nature of greed, and it never fulfills. Anything that's self-perpetuating, anything that requires me to carry a dagger in order to get what I want, never satisfies in the end.
Yes, but when the prodigal returns, he discovers that this is a place where he is always a son, where his previous behavior doesn't preclude him from being a son. But being a son doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have responsibilities.
No.
When you get to the house of love, that doesn't mean you just sit around and wait for the drinks to be brought to you. No, you participate, because loving is active, isn't it? We love each other in active.
I hinted at it just now when I said that freedom carries responsibilities with it. So even though I'm in the house of God, in the house of love, yes, I have responsibilities. But they're not irksome. They're not burdensome. They're a pleasure to give, and hospitality is a responsibility.
Yeah.
But as you know, and I know about you, it's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure.
It's immensely satisfying, because, and you don't really need to hear too many compliments about it. It's just the fact of facilitating people being at ease and being in each other's company and enjoying themselves and feeling like family and all the rest of it. And I mean, we'll pick this up next time when we talk about the older son, but I think the house of love includes very specifically that line that the father uses as he tries to coax the older son into the room, where he says, "You are always with me, and everything I have is yours."
Yeah.
There's nothing else to give. You have it all already. You may not feel like you have it. Serving has become slaving for you, but it is yours.
And think of yourself as a father when you would use the phrase, "You're always with me." Your girls are always with you, even when they couldn't care less, in an ugly way. They shut themselves off, or they're just too busy, or they're at school. They're always with you in your heart. And I think that line is directly from the Father, sculpted by Jesus, that as far as we may go away from him, we actually never go away. Psalm 139, where can I go to get away from your spirit? If I go here, if I go there, you're there all the time. And that's the language of the Father. You're always with me.
And then just to pick up a quote there, on page 35 in the section on the younger son, Henri writes, "Home is the center of my being, where I can hear the voice that says, 'You are my beloved. On you my favor rests.' The same voice that gave life to the first Adam and spoke to Jesus, the second Adam. The same voice that speaks to all the children of God and sets them free to live in the midst of a dark world while remaining in the light. I have heard that voice. It has been spoken to me in the past and continues to speak to me now. It is the never interrupted voice of love, speaking from eternity and giving life and love wherever it is heard." Isn't that incredible?
Absolutely marvelous.
So he's relating it.
Voice of love.
That's right. So he's relating it to that the voice that came at the baptism of Jesus, where the Father acknowledges Jesus as his beloved, and he says what he's doing there is applicable to all of us.
Yes,
who belong to him.
Absolutely. So take seriously your baptism.
Yes,
it's a welcome into the household of God yet again. I've tried to say to the congregation over the years that in baptism we are saying welcome, and God is saying welcome to my family, and at Holy Communion He's saying welcome again. You've made a mess, welcome again, and again and again and again. So as often as you do this, you're welcome. Yes. And then finally, come resurrection, it's welcome home.
Yes.
And what freedom that's going to be, and what joy that's going to be. Just wow, we're at home.
Yes, and I was thinking about this this notion of the house of love, and I was thinking about the returning to the home on the part of the prodigal, and I wondered if there isn't an archetype at work here of Eden. The Genesis account tells us of us being in a harmonious situation. We were in an Eden. Even the word Eden now has the connotations of paradise, perfection, a place where you feel at home, right?
Yes.
So we were there, and we had everything that we needed. And of course, we may have had responsibilities. That doesn't mean we didn't have responsibilities, but we had to look after the earth. Yes, we did. Yeah. But even from Eden, from that idyllic situation, we chose to leave, like the prodigal did.
Yes. Yeah.
So you see the archetypes of the story, and then and then the return is almost the end of the story. It's the God going to Abraham and offering to adopt Abraham. It's the God going to Moses and saying, "Okay, I'll be with you. We've got to get these people out of here." And again, and most especially, the story of Jesus, where we hear that God wants us to come home.
Well, there's really something about the Son that is so far away that there is something in him that knows I can at least take the risk to go back to the Father. I think God in his mercy has given every one of us the awareness that he's there. So Kushoka Kuyama was a guest of ours many years ago, and he linked Genesis 3 of God saying to Adam and Eve, "Where are you?" He linked that with John saying of Jesus, "He came to that which his own, and his own did not know him." That they had, in a sense, put themselves out of his reach. But on both instances, the Father comes to them in the cool of the evening, to find them, but wants self-revelation. And Jesus comes to us and simply wants some response from us, of just acknowledging that he has come that way. And I think the story of the prodigal is that there's something about the father that says, I'm able to go back, only to discover how much more true it was than he could ever imagine.
Yes. Okay, and just to be thorough, before we go into the next point, we mentioned last time we spoke that this was a fivefold interplay of texts. There's the original told by Jesus in Luke 15. There's the painting of Rembrandt, which forms another text, and it's slightly different to the story, but just as evoking. And then there's the story of Rembrandt himself. And we saw that picture earlier on. I put it on the screen, where Rembrandt paints himself in the face of the young son in the bar with Saskia. And then, of course, Nouwen goes on to say that Rembrandt has also put the side of his face, the facade, in the younger son, in this original painting, the one that we're looking at. So Rembrandt felt himself to be the younger son. He felt himself to be this younger son in the bar. He felt himself to be the younger son in the father's embrace. And Nouwen tells the story then of how Rembrandt was spendthrift, arrogant. The closest I can come to this, to understanding this, is that movie, I don't know if you saw it years ago, Amadeus, which spoke about the history of Mozart. I mean, the garish hats, the costumes, the money, the drink, and so on. Just a lavish and flamboyant lifestyle, but over the top,
Yes.
This is the kind of character that Rembrandt was.
Yes.
And then, to my great surprise, Henri says that Henri feels that he was also the prodigal son, the younger son.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it helps to compare one's level of dissipation, let's say, with others. I think if you feel it, you feel it, because it's the Spirit of God who's convicting you of sin at that point, and you just know that from whatever level you were or could be, you have fallen, and fallen in all sorts of ways, and you've got to come back home. You've just got to. You're not going to clean yourself out there. In fact, it gets worse and worse. You tell one lie and you try and hide it. You've got to tell two to cover the one. You've got to cover four to cover the two. You've got to come home and say, I need this love. I need this house of love. Yeah.
Now, it's interesting because when I try to put myself in the story, which is of course the fifth level, going down the line, I can't really identify very much with Rembrandt's story. I don't think I was ever lost in that way. I mean, I've done a few things I wouldn't care to repeat, but I'd certainly never felt as though I went off the rails wildly, and I don't think any of my family would have felt that. But I do have a sympathy for what Henri is talking about, because at some point there was some alienation with what went before, with maybe the home situation, maybe the kind of ideals I had for myself. I didn't really feel attracted to that anymore. There was a new thing I had to do, just like Henri went over and started teach at Yale. Well, first to the Menninger Institute in Kansas, and then went to teach at Yale in the 70s. He went off and I went off. I remember once saying to my mother, when I come back from Rhodes, even on a holiday, it will be for a holiday. I don't live here anymore. And I didn't realize how much that would upset her, but it was the truth. And she knew it and I knew it. And so it wasn't a sense of running off and doing something wild, but it was a sense that this is not really home. But then it became home again when one is older and one has one's own family. And you realize home is not really it's about the relationships. And so you restore that kind of thing. Mm.
You know, when we want to compare with other people, or just even try and get into their own history, as Henry's doing here about himself, there are places in me. I don't stay there too long, but there are places in me that wishes that I wish I had a more exciting story to tell. You know, I drank, I swore, I slept with women, I gambled my life away, and then I met Jesus and thunderclap, everything came right.
Mm.
Well, it wasn't like that for me. I mean, you know, but there was a definite transition at some point. But I've got to be honest and say there are times in my life, even up until now, where I want to be free.
Mm.
Even again, my dear friend Kingsley, your friend too, he once asked me, don't you have some days when you just wished you were irresponsible? Boy, I thought, thank heavens for the question, because there are days where I wish I wasn't. I was free to be irresponsible.
Mm.
And the other days, just sometimes the weariness of the job, the weariness of people around you, you want to throw off the responsibility, forgetting that in fact that's part of the freedom that holds us. We are free to stay in this house of love and free to invite others in. Step outside of it in freedom, and it's just wilderness. You know.
Yes.
So it's always relationships.
I do remember a very striking sermon you preached once about being adopted. And that your family, your home family, you felt were not your real family, and that was a very striking sermon, because it really helped me to think through where one's identity lies. And I know this is kind of opposite of the prodigal son, because you're moving from something which you don't feel is as connected to God as it could be, to something that's more connected, and then looking back and feeling alienation. But talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, as you speak about it, I remember the sermon very well. I was trying to show the fact that we've been adopted by Christ. Okay, so I began the sermon by simply saying, I don't think I ever told you that I've been adopted. And I said to the congregation, the parents who looked after me were Amy and Jimmy Botsis. And I spelled it all the way out until we came to conversion. Well, congregations only hear what they want to hear. So there were many people who came out and they said, we never knew you were adopted by those people. In the same way, I because I look after some alcoholics, AA, and I'm a sponsor, whatever, I refer to going to AA meetings. And there are a couple of members who are absolutely convinced that I was an alcoholic somewhere down the road. And, you know, all kudos to me, man. Hell, you've done a fantastic job if you've thrown off that whole stuff.
Well, good, all things to all people.
But isn't it nice that there can be a recognition of what God has done in your life, that He's brought you in to a place and out of the wilderness into the home, out of the houses of fear into a place of celebration.
Yes.
That's just so beautiful, George.
It's great. And at the end, Henri Nouwen gives a little reference to his own situation, which can very easily be our situation than the people who are watching this video clip. He says, I'm the prodigal son every time I search for unconditional love where it cannot be found. And that really tells a little bit of his story. And, you know, priests, monks, nuns are not supposed to form attachments. Even, and people think this is only romance, and it's not necessarily only romance, but it's a deep dependence, as one often does on a friendship or a married relationship or another kind of relationship. But what he is saying in this book, and he's talking from deep, deep inside himself, is that every time he has made such an attachment, and why wouldn't he? He is the prodigal because the person with whom he's made the attachment is not able to deliver on what he needs.
Yeah. But isn't it true of all of us? I mean, I have struggled my whole life, and especially since conversion, of feeling inferior to some others. And all you want to hear at some point, not necessarily from them, but in answer to the question, how am I doing? You want some affirmation. But the fact we need to ask the question is the problem. Because in the house of love, you never need to ask the question. You would just know.
You know.
You know, and like, when we desire for something that's not of God, it's never ever going to be fulfilling. And the sad thing is, we become like the idols that we have, and they, in the end, are man-made and useless, and leave us feeling stressed because we have served them rather than them, the Father blessing us. Idolatry is a terrible, terrible thing.
Okay.
And we all have idols, and often it's just this: I need to be affirmed by someone else. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to bring the conversation to a close, and there's another little quote here towards the end of this section where Henri Nouwen writes the depth to which the younger son had to fall before he realized his mistake and before he turned his eyes towards home. And he says, this is on page 43, when the younger son was no longer considered a human being by the people around him, he felt the profundity of his isolation, the deepest loneliness one can experience. He was truly lost, and it was this complete lostness that brought him to his senses. He was shocked into the awareness of his utter alienation and suddenly understood that he had embarked on the road to death. He had become so disconnected from what gives life, family, friends, community, acquaintances, even food, that he realized that death would be the next natural step. And skipping to the bottom of the paragraph, in that critical moment, what was it that allowed him to opt for life? And then he answers his own question by saying, it was the rediscovery of his deepest self. So do you think it's necessary to get to that point where you're on the brink of death and alienation from your very self?
Again, I think this is the mercy of God that our lives are all very different. I don't think it's necessary to get to that kind of depths of where he was. But I think we've got to come to some point of realizing our true self belongs to God. And we don't have to be completely and utterly lost in deprivation, debauchery. But there's got to be in each of us the realization: I'm made in His image. I'm breathing the breath He gave me. I'm ultimately of His hand, and I'm ultimately going to find my way to humanity by coming to the Son of Man. When we shy away from God, there's never deep and lasting fulfillment. Never. Even to the point that people will control from beyond the grave, rather than simply let things go. So I think there was something in the Father's love that remained deep within the Son. And in this place of being no better than the pigs themselves, in fact, worse than the pigs because they had food and he didn't.
Yes.
There's this spark, we call it the Holy Spirit, that says, but you belong to God. And the journey begins back home.
Yes, so what interests me is that when Nouwen says at the end there, he discovered his deepest self, what does that actually mean? Is that some ethereal thing about souls and Greek philosophy and the spirit and all that kind of thing? I actually think, and I think Nouwen bears it out later on, that when he says he discovered his deeper self, he simply said to himself inside his head, I am still the Son of the Father.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
I think it's a bit like Augustine saying we're restless until we find our rest in you. So that you don't have to be in the piggy world. You could be lost in wealth. You could be lost in just normality and the dullness of middle class life. But there is that place of restlessness, and then something keeps saying to you, "But you're restless."
Yes,
you're restless, and then it's to turn home to the house.
Yes.
And not houses.
Although I think restlessness can be, can be something which happens within the context of the house as well. I have felt restlessness at numerous points over the years, and that restlessness has pushed me towards something. It may have been a change of call, but more often than not, it's just something else. It's a new direction, or reading a new direction in which to read, an area of exploration. I know I was restless about faith, and then I started to explore Christian spirituality and started reading authors, like Thomas Merton and others who really helped me to expand that area.
But George, you can see in terms of who you are in the Father's love that restlessness is part of the freedom you enjoy. That you're who He has made you to be, you will never fully discover until you're back home in heaven.
Oh yes.
And that's the wonder. Yes, there's a restlessness constantly because I'm not completely the way I have been made to be. And that's great. But outside of the kingdom of God, that's hell.
Oh, I'm sure it is, yes.
Within the kingdom, it's just a privilege, a joy. It's just a wonderful thing.
Yes.
In the
but now,
house.
Nouwen goes on to point out that there are two significant biblical characters, both disciples of Jesus, who handled their lostness in different ways. He says that what Judas did on the night of Jesus' arrest proved that he was a lost person. Yes. And it also revealed his lostness. But then what Peter did outside the place where Jesus was on trial, where he was confronted and he was told, but weren't you part of the group and so on, and he was determined that was not true. That was also a sign of lostness. And I think Nouwen uses that story to encourage us that there are really two different ways to deal with lostness. Either we can end it all, as the prodigal could have done, or we can allow God to use our lostness to do something beautiful. Not so?
Well, absolutely. I wrote this down in thinking about this. Hell is the utter lostness coupled with the refusal to take the road home. That's Judas's position. I'm so lost. The money that I've got is even of no value to me. I'm going to chuck it back. I'm completely and utterly lost because there's a refusal to come back to Christ and ask for forgiveness. Peter is in a different place.
But there's also shame, isn't there? Overcoming shame. In the ancient world, honor and shame was a big thing. And I think parts of African culture also, include this notion of honor and shame and saving face and things like that. And I don't want to make it an artificial thing because I think it's a real thing. I've been in a situation where many times, where I've said something in jest and it's been misunderstood. And then I feel a level of shame. I think, well, I didn't actually intend to insult this person or make them feel less than. It was a joke, but it went wrong. But now what am I going to do with it? Am I going to say sorry? Am I going to, turn it back on myself or do something that will enable the person to regain face?
As you say that, you can see what I mean by saying you've exercised freedom to make a joke or something, but the freedom has cost something.
Yes.
And that's the problem. We think our freedom, self-made freedom, is costless. I've taken my inheritance, I can do what I like with it. But it's constantly costing somebody something. And the picture that Rembrandt paints, and the one that you put up that Sasha found is so much clearer, is the shame of the son, but being encompassed by the Father's love again. And I wish we could hear. I'm busy reading Reverse Thunder by Peterson again, and he's just so inspiring about having to hear the word of God and not just read it. And as I look at the painting of Rembrandt here, I want to hear the Father already shouting over the kneeling Son, shouting to the rest of the servants, "Come on, get the meal going, get the robe out, get the ring out." And so it's not a dull, empty, silent painting.
Yes,
there's a vibrance going on around it, but we can get to that another time.
Wow. And then I was just thinking as you were talking that twice I've had an opportunity to preach a charge for a very close friend, two different friends, on some occasion, and I've gravitated towards John 21 because I think it's so fundamental that we come back from failure, knowing full well that it'll make us better leaders, better ministers, better servants of Christ than we ever were before.
Yes.
I think Peter his life was completely transformed, and his abilities accentuated, and his reliance on God extended by that encounter with Jesus after the miraculous catch of fish, where Jesus confronts him with the only question that's really important, and he's able to answer honestly, even in the shame of a denier. He can say, "Yes, Lord, you know that I do." So can we become better? Is the prodigal likely to become a better person in the story that we don't read because it's the one that comes after the story? Is he able to be different, to be better, to be more suitable as an instrument in God's hands? And are the rest of us in the same boat because we overcame the shame of the pigsty and we walked home and we experienced the Father's love?
George, I have always loved 2 Corinthians 3:18, that we are being changed from one degree of glory to another by the Spirit. So as you were talking, I thought the answer lies within ourselves. There are places when I know I'm better. There are places where I hope, like the real saints, the closer I get to God, the more ragged I look, the more prodigal I think I am, the more I need to be covered by his love. But I also know that he is at work in my heart and my life. And that's such a comfort to me, that when I've stumbled and bumbled along and people have later returned to acknowledge something of the goodness of God, yes, we are better. We are better than we were when we were lost. Yeah.
Okay, last question. I just want to focus in on that very last scene before the embrace. And that is, we've come with an explanation. And I'm asking you this question because I've been in the same situation over and over again. Something has happened, it's been my fault, and I have an explanation. And I can rationalize why I did and why I said what I did. And I'm ready to tell you, and I've worked out the words. In fact, it's quite, one can get at one's most articulate when one is in trouble. But when it comes out, there's this shortness of breath. I'm sure you felt this. You want to say it, and you're trying to do it nicely, but the tension in you, because this is a disaster, and there's no way to
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So he comes, and then the beauty and the graciousness of God in the story as the loving Father is that he doesn't say be quiet. He doesn't say stop talking. He just embraces, he accepts. He doesn't embarrass even further. The embarrassment is there, even if it is covered with rationalization. So this is a beautiful image of what it is like between God and us in the end, not so?
I think it's absolutely beautiful. You talk about battling to get something out or trying to make the explanation. Our mutual friend, Alan Maker, I did something wrong in his life at one point, and I had to write him a letter of apology. And I thought it was a damn good letter, and it was really from the heart. And he wrote back and said, Rod, long apologies are seldom sincere. And I realized, actually, you see, he was more ready to forgive than I was to confess. Mm-hmm. If I had simply said, I'm sorry, Al, the same forgiveness would have come from that simple acknowledgement and as I got from the long explanation. And I think with all the Father does here is he simply embraces, because whether the Son speaks or not, cries or not, tries to explain or not, the forgiveness is there. It's just an embrace. So beautiful.
Yeah, well, thank you for this. I've enjoyed this conversation just as much as the first one. It's been a lot of fun. You and I, we're the prodigal son. Forgiven.
Speak for yourself.
Ransomed, healed, restored, forgiven.
Beautiful.
And what a privilege it is to be that. But as we shall discover in our next conversation, that's not the end of the story, because while we are the younger son, it's easy sometimes to acknowledge one's connection. It's not so easy to acknowledge the connection with the next character in the story. But this was a profound turning around of the story for me when I first read it. It was before I got to that chapter, I had never identified with the older son, but we'll keep that discussion for next time.
That's great.
Thanks,
George,
Ron.
I'm so glad you are in the family of God. Thank you so much.
Thanks.